The HOA president kept fining me, so I ran for HOA president and ended up evicting him. Another day, another ridiculous fine from our HOA president only this time. I wasn't going to let it slide. I came home from work to find a bright yellow violation notice taped to my front door, flapping in the breeze for all my neighbors to see. $200 fine. Lawn not edged to HOA standards, it read. Are you kidding me? I dropped my bag on the porch and crumpled the notice in my fist. This was the third fine this month for absurd things that barely even qualified as offenses. My hands were shaking with anger as I remembered the previous two fines, one for having a garden hose visible, seriously, and another because the paint on my mailbox was slightly faded. Each time, it was our smug HOA president, Rick, who delivered the notices with a self-satisfied smile. I had tried to be a good neighbor and follow the rules, but this was beyond petty. It felt personal, like he was singling me out for some reason. And at that moment, standing on my porch with that crumpled paper, I decided I was done rolling over. If Rick wanted a fight, he was about to get one. To give some context, I moved into this neighborhood 2 years ago with my wife Emily and our then-infant son. We were excited to own our first home in what looked like a quiet, friendly suburban community. It had tree-lined streets, a little park, and supposedly a great school district. What it also had, something we learned quickly, was an HOA president from hell. Rick had been HOA president for the last 5 years, and he ruled the community like it was his personal kingdom. He was retired, early 60s maybe, with too much time and an apparent joy for nitpicking. At first, we tried to stay under the radar. We read all the HOA bylaws, kept our yard tidy, and introduced ourselves politely. But almost immediately, Rick seemed to decide we were his new target. Maybe he didn't like new young families, or maybe because we were on the corner lot and highly visible, making us an example. Whatever it was, he zeroed in on us from day one. The very first week after we moved in, Rick showed up uninvited while we were unpacking boxes. He didn't say welcome or nice to meet you. Instead, he handed us a printed list of common HOA violations to avoid and sternly noted that trash pickup was on Tuesdays, cans must be off the curb by noon or there's a fine. That was our welcome. I remember exchanging a glance with Emily like, is this guy for real? We brushed it off at the time, just an overzealous neighbor, right? But it only escalated. Within the first month, he fined us $50 because our front grass was too long. I measured it myself. It was maybe 3 inches high, and we had literally moved in 3 weeks prior. I paid that fine, figuring, okay, I'll play ball, keep the peace. Mistake. It was like blood in the water. Once he knew he could catch us on something, he kept at it. By the time I received that bright yellow notice about edging the lawn, I'd accumulated over $700 in fines in 2 years, all from Rick. And these weren't legitimate things like junk cars on blocks or wild parties. No, these were insane, trivial violations that most neighbors never got dinged for. For example, one fine was because our garden hose was coiled next to the house instead of hidden out of sight. Another was because we had a small wreath on our door after the holiday season. It was mid-January and I hadn't taken it down yet. Meanwhile, other houses still had full-blown Christmas lights up in mid-February and didn't get fined. It was clearly targeted. I attended an HOA meeting to dispute the hose fine, and Rick, presiding over the meeting, just gave me this fake smile and said, "We have to enforce the rules, my name. It's nothing personal." Right. Nothing personal, yet he'd stroll by other houses with obvious violations and do nothing. A neighbor 2 doors down had a boat in his driveway, against HOA rules, and Rick said, not a peep. What really broke me was the incident last week. I had painted our mailbox post because the old paint was chipping. I even used a color as close to the original as I could find, a plain off-white. Somehow, Rick claimed it was unapproved color and slapped me with a $150 fine, and in order to repaint it immediately in the approved shade, which apparently was a slightly different off-white, basically the same to any human eye. When I read that notice, I actually laughed in disbelief. I went to Rick's house, just down the street, to discuss it calmly. I found him in his driveway, polishing his already gleaming car. I kept my tone measured and said, "Hey Rick, I got this notice about the mailbox color. There must be some mistake. It's practically the same color it was. Can we talk about this?" He didn't even turn to face me. Still buffing his car, he said, "If it's not on the approved list, it's not allowed. You should have checked." I was trying not to lose my temper. I did check the guidelines. It says neutral colors are fine. This is neutral. Now he finally looked at me, with that thin smile. It's close to neutral, but it's not the specified eggshell beige. Rules are rules. You have 1 week to repaint, or the fines will continue. Then he added, maybe this will teach you to follow our processes properly next time. The condescension dripping from his voice made my blood boil. I wanted to tell him where he could shove his paintbrush, but instead I just walked away, fuming. That night Emily found me in the garage angrily reorganizing my tools, my go-to stress relief. She gently asked me to come inside, and we talked. I vented about how powerless I felt, how Rick was clearly abusing his position to pick on us. She admitted she'd overheard some neighbors mentioning similar issues with Rick's nitpicking, especially toward newer residents. Emily suggested maybe we should just sell the house and move to a non-HOA neighborhood. The fact that she was even considering uprooting our life because of this jerk made something snap in me. Why should we be the ones to leave? We loved our home. We hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't fair that one power-tripping man could sour our whole experience. I decided then that I was going to fight back in the most effective way possible. Yelling at Rick or refusing to pay fines would just get us into legal trouble. HOAs can place liens on your home if you don't pay. No, I needed to beat him at his own game. I needed to remove him from power. When I said this to Emily, half joking at first, maybe I should just run for HOA president myself. Her face lit up with a spark I hadn't seen in a while. She said quietly, that might not be a crazy idea. We shared a mischievous look. In that moment, a plan was born. I began by discreetly talking to neighbors I was friendly with. I'd bring up the HOA in casual chats, mention some of the fines I got, and ask if they'd had similar experiences. Oh boy, did I open a floodgate. One neighbor, Linda, confided that Rick had fined her for having her curtains the wrong shade of white. Allegedly, they looked too yellow from outside. She paid up because she was scared of making waves. Another neighbor, Jorge, got a fine for parking his pickup truck in his own driveway overnight. Even though the street and driveways technically allowed it, Rick claimed it was against the aesthetic guidelines. The more stories I heard, the more obvious it became that Rick was terrorizing a lot of us with selective enforcement. Many neighbors were frustrated, but most didn't attend the HOA meetings or know how to fight back. Some were older folks who didn't want conflict. Others were busy young families who just paid the fines to avoid hassle. I realized Rick thrived on our apathy and fear. The annual HOA meeting, where elections could be held for the board positions, was coming up in a few months, in May. Historically, hardly anyone showed up to these meetings, maybe a dozen people out of the 50 homes, which is how Rick and his cronies stayed in power. If I wanted to oust him, I'd need to rally more homeowners to actually attend and vote. So over the next several weeks, I became a bit of a neighborhood busybody, in a good way, I hope. On evening walks with my toddler in the stroller, I'd stop and chat with folks, subtly bringing up HOA stuff. I printed out simple flyers and quietly slipped them into mailboxes or screen doors when I knew Rick wasn't around, encouraging neighbors to come to the upcoming HOA meeting to make our community better. I carefully avoided openly attacking Rick in writing, because I had a feeling he'd try to retaliate if he caught wind of an opposition. But in one-on-one conversations, I definitely let people know I was considering running for HOA president, and asked if I could count on their support. Many were surprised. No one had dared challenge Rick in years, but a lot of eyes lit up at the idea. It gave them hope that things could change. Of course, Rick started to sense something. It's a small neighborhood, and I wasn't exactly stealthy with all my meet and greets. One afternoon, I found Rick standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, arms crossed, watching me as I played with my son on the lawn. His gaze was icy. I smiled and waved, all friendly-like. He didn't wave back. I could tell he suspected that I was up to something, but he couldn't exactly find me for talking to neighbors. Still, the very next day I got a violation email, a new tactic. He usually left paper notices, but I guess he wanted to be sneakier, claiming that the small decorative flag we had by our front steps was unapproved signage. It was literally a seasonal flag with a pumpkin on it for fall. I groaned and showed Emily the email. She rolled her eyes and said, "He's just trying to intimidate you. Don't let him." So we left the flag up on purpose and ignored the warning. I half expected to come home to it torn down, but it remained, and surprisingly no fine followed. Perhaps he realized a fine wouldn't stick since the HOA rules actually allowed seasonal decorations. As the meeting drew closer, I prepped like it was a political campaign. In a way, it was. I gathered copies of our bylaws, highlighted sections about member rights and election procedures. I rehearsed what I'd say if given a chance. I also dug into Rick's track record. I discovered something interesting. The HOA's financial statements, what little detail they showed, indicated some odd expenditures. For instance, there was a yearly maintenance fee for the community park that was quite high, but the park was often in disrepair. And a line item for legal services paid to a law firm I'd never heard of, even though there hadn't been any lawsuits that anyone knew of. I suspected Rick was funneling HOA money into things that benefited him somehow, but I didn't have solid proof yet. Still, this was a potential angle to explore once I had more authority, if I won. The night of the HOA annual meeting arrived. I wasn't sure how many people would actually come, despite my efforts. I walked into the small community center building with Emily by my side for support. To my relief and Rick's visible displeasure, we had over 30 homeowners show up, more than I'd ever seen at any meeting. People were actually mingling, grumbling about issues, and there was an energetic buzz in the air about change. Rick tried to play it cool at the front of the room, but I saw him repeatedly glancing at the unusually large crowd with a frown. The meeting started in the usual boring way, Rick going through the agenda, trying to rush through officer reports, clearly not wanting to give anyone time to raise complaints. When it came time for elections, which Rick probably assumed would be a formality as always, he announced, a bit tightly, that nominations were open for president, vice president, etc., each seat. I stood up and nominated myself for president. There were audible gasps and whispers. Rick's eyes narrowed into slits. One of his allies on the board, a toady neighbor named Glenn, immediately piped up, "But Rick is doing a great job. I nominate Rick to continue." Fine, of course, he nominated Rick. Usually, at this point, if no one else ran, they'd just re-elect Rick by default. But this time there was a challenger, me, so we had to actually vote. We gave short speeches. I kept mine respectful but firm, focusing on wanting transparency, fair enforcement of rules, and a more friendly community. I deliberately didn't attack Rick directly on personal terms, but I certainly alluded to overzealous enforcement and the need for fresh leadership that listens to residents' concerns. Rick's speech, by contrast, was defensive. He talked about how he'd, quote, sacrificed countless hours to keep the neighborhood pristine and how rule enforcement was crucial for property values. He also threw a slight dig at me, saying leading an HOA is not for everyone, especially people who don't understand the dedication it takes. Whatever, dude. When we cast the votes, 1 vote per household present, I honestly was sweating. I knew a lot of people were unhappy, but would they actually vote out the devil they knew? In a dramatic reveal, just paper ballots counted by the secretary, but it felt dramatic to me, I won by 2 votes, 15 to 13. I actually heard a small cheer from a corner of the room, and a bunch of people looked positively giddy. I tried to hide my huge grin. Rick looked like someone had spit in his coffee. His face went red and he sputtered, claiming some nonsense like, "This isn't how we usually do things. People normally give a heads up if they plan to run." A few homeowners responded that the whole point of elections is anyone can run. He then declared that the votes would need to be verified, grasping at straws. The HOA secretary, not one of Rick's close buddies, thankfully, cleared her throat and said the count was verified and in the record. Checkmate. And just like that, I became the new HOA president. Honestly, I was exhilarated and a bit terrified at the same time. That night, after the meeting, Emily and I celebrated quietly on our back patio with a couple of beers. We whispered so our son wouldn't wake, laughing nervously that we might have actually pulled it off. I remember Emily grabbing my hand and saying, "I'm proud of you. You really stood up for us." That felt damn good. Of course, the saga was far from over. Rick didn't speak to me after the meeting. He left in a hurry, avoiding eye contact. I figured he was stewing, and I was right. The very next day, an email went out to the entire HOA from Rick, effectively contesting the election results. He claimed the voting process was improper, and that some attendees weren't eligible to vote due to not being in good standing, which usually means having unpaid dues or violations. This was complete BS, and just a tactic to invalidate some of the votes for me. I knew for a fact all those who voted for me were in good standing, because I'd made sure they were folks fed up but current on dues. It turned into a tense week of back and forth. As interim president, since technically I was elected, though Rick refused to hand over things, I called an emergency board meeting to address his complaints. He showed up not as president, but as just a homeowner, with Glenn tagging along. He looked absolutely fuming as I sat in his usual seat at the head of the table. I won't bore you with every detail, but I had come prepared with the HOA bylaws, which clearly outlined the election procedures. I patiently countered each of his claims, and the majority of the board, seeing the writing on the wall that residents wanted change, sided with me. In the end, Rick's contesting of the election fell flat. He stormed out of that board meeting after I firmly informed him that per the bylaws, he needed to turn over any HOA property, keys, financial documents, etc., by the end of the week, or face consequences. He gave me the nastiest glare I'd ever seen and practically growled, "You'll regret this." It was like a villain's cliché line. Glenn skittered after him. With Rick effectively ousted from the presidency, I dove into my new role. Part of me had expected that once dethroned, Rick might back off and maybe even sell his house out of humiliation. Some neighbors hoped so, but he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he became a thorn in my side as just a member of the HOA. He'd show up to every meeting, sit in the front, and glare at me, ready to object to everything I proposed. If I suggested a new community event, he'd grumble about costs. If we discussed enforcing a rule more fairly, he'd suddenly champion stricter enforcement. It was honestly kind of pathetic. He had no real power, but he was trying to derail progress out of spite. I stayed polite in meetings, but outside of them I started gathering ammunition. Remember those fishy financials? Once I had access to all HOA records, I finally got to see the full picture. It was uglier than I thought. Rick had been waiving his own annual HOA dues for years. No record of him paying dues in 3 years, which is against the rules since everyone has to pay. He had also approved HOA payments to a landscaping company that, upon a bit of research, turned out to be owned by his cousin. This company was paid to mow lawns in common areas and maintain the park, but half the time the work was either shoddy or not even done. Explains why our park was always a mess. It looked like a classic kickback scheme. He'd pay his cousin's company overly generous fees in HOA money, and maybe he got a cutback under the table. There were also unexplained expenses for office supplies that totaled way more than they should, which raised the possibility he was buying things for personal use with HOA funds. I quietly shared these findings with the other board members, minus Rick's cronies, who were no longer on the board after the election. Some had resigned or been voted out too. Everyone was furious. This was essentially fraud and theft from the community. We decided to involve the HOA's lawyer and potentially pursue legal action against Rick to recover misused funds. But there was an even more immediate and satisfying angle: Rick's unpaid HOA dues. Under our bylaws, if a homeowner is delinquent on dues for a certain period, over a year I think, the HOA can put a lien on their property, and if they still don't pay, the HOA can actually move towards foreclosure on the house. It's extreme and rarely done, but it's legal. Now, usually an HOA wouldn't foreclose unless someone hasn't paid dues for years and owes a ton, but Rick currently owed about 3 years' worth of dues plus late fees, over $3,000. And he clearly had no intention of paying, since he probably thought he'd never be held accountable, ironic given how fine-happy he was with others. At the next board meeting, with homeowners in attendance, I added an agenda item about delinquent accounts. When we got to that, I looked directly at Rick, sitting there with arms crossed, scowling, and calmly said, "It appears one homeowner in particular has neglected to pay HOA dues for quite some time. This is obviously unacceptable, as we all rely on those funds for community maintenance." You could see him realize where this was going. He shifted uncomfortably. Before he could interrupt, I continued, "As per our policy, if the balance isn't paid in full within 30 days, the board will have to place a lien on the property and begin legal action. I truly hope we won't have to do that." The other board members nodded in agreement. A couple of neighbors in the audience stared at Rick, eyes wide. Rick exploded. He stood up and yelled, "This is a personal attack. You can't do that." I responded, still calm, that actually, yes, we can and would, as it's in the bylaws he himself enforced on others. The sheer poetic justice of threatening him with the same rulebook he'd wielded against the rest of us, I won't lie, it felt amazing. True to form, Rick stomped out of that meeting in a fury, cursing under his breath. He even shoulder-checked me on his way out, to which one of the board members said, "Real mature, Rick," which I had to bite my tongue not to laugh at. Over the next few weeks, 2 things happened simultaneously. We formally initiated legal proceedings regarding the funds he misappropriated. Lawyer drafted a demand letter and we prepared to alert the police for possible criminal charges. And we filed the paperwork for a lien on Rick's house for the unpaid dues. During this time, we heard that Rick had put his house up for sale. I guess he was trying to cut and run before the law could catch up or before he was pushed out. But selling wouldn't be easy with an HOA lien pending and an investigation. He was cornered, and he knew it. One afternoon, I was in my home office, aka a corner of the living room with my laptop, when I saw a moving truck in front of Rick's house. My heart practically leapt. Was it really happening? I walked out and saw Rick barking orders at movers, his face red and flustered. I won't pretend I wasn't absolutely thrilled inside, but I played it cool. I casually strolled over, under the guise of checking my mailbox. Rick saw me and we locked eyes. For a moment, maybe I saw a flicker of regret, or just pure hatred, hard to tell. In a spiteful tone, he said, "Enjoy being king of the neighborhood, you little shit. This place is gonna fall apart without me." So much for not swearing. He had no such filter. I smiled as genuinely as I could and said, "I think we'll be just fine. Take care, Rick." He started to say something, then just shook his head, walked to his car, and slammed the door. And just like that, he was gone, evicted by the very rules he abused. Of course, officially he wasn't evicted. He sold his house under duress, but in my mind, yeah, we evicted him from our community. The neighborhood exhaled a collective sigh of relief. A few of us kind of celebrated on the down low after his car and the moving truck rolled away. Even Glenn, his former toady, seemed to almost wipe his brow in relief. Turns out Glenn had feared Rick's retaliation too, and once Rick was gone, Glenn actually approached me to apologize for not standing up to him. It was an unexpected conversation. I accepted his apology, and he admitted Rick had bullied everyone on the board to get his way. In a weird way, it was cathartic to realize the evil HOA empire was mostly one man's doing, and most others resented him too. In the weeks after, we audited the HOA books thoroughly, changed a bunch of rules to prevent any one person from having that much unchecked power, and eliminated a bunch of stupid fines, including all those fines Rick gave out so liberally, forgiving any outstanding ones as a goodwill gesture. The atmosphere in the neighborhood is so much lighter now. I even have neighbors volunteering to help with improvement projects just because they feel invested again, instead of afraid. For me personally, I won't lie, it was a huge victory. One of the most satisfying things I've ever done, but it was also draining and took a toll. Emily told me she hadn't seen me that driven, borderline obsessed, in a long time, and that while she was proud, she was also looking forward to me having less HOA drama on my mind, so I could relax and spend more time with family. She's right. I poured a lot of my life into fighting Rick those months. Was it worth it? Yes, to me. But I'm hoping things stay peaceful now. At the end of the day, we didn't just get revenge. We took our community back. And every time I walked by the spot where Rick's for sale sign was staked, it got taken down after the sale went through last week, I feel a deep sense of accomplishment. The HOA president kept fining me, so I became the HOA president and got rid of him for good. Don't start a war you're not prepared to lose, I guess. Honestly, I thought this saga was over when Rick drove away, but oh boy, I was wrong. I have a couple of updates to share, and things got even more intense in ways I didn't expect. Update 1. Hi again. I wasn't sure about posting an update, but a lot has happened since Rick left, and not all of it is the happily ever after I was hoping for. It's been about 3 months since the original showdown and Rick's hasty departure. In that time, I settled into my role as HOA president, trying to make good on my promises to the neighborhood. We revamped a bunch of rules, as I mentioned, and even organized a community barbecue, the first one in years, to rebuild morale. On the surface, things have been great. Neighbors are friendlier, complaints are way down, and I haven't issued a single fine since taking over, opting for polite reminders and conversations instead, which actually get results without breeding resentment. However, behind the scenes, there's been some personal fallout I never anticipated. Turns out, ousting a petty tyrant doesn't erase the bad blood overnight. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an anonymous note left in my mailbox. It was just a scrap of paper that said, "Watch your back," and glued together letters like a cliché ransom note. I actually laughed when I saw it, figuring it was some kind of joke, or maybe even something my friends did to rib me about becoming boss of the neighborhood. Emily was uneasy, though. "That's not funny. Who would do that?" she asked, taking it more seriously. I shrugged it off, telling her it was probably nothing. A week later, our trash cans went missing. Friday is trash collection day, and I remember because we had a ton of garbage after cleaning out our garage. I put the cans by the curb in the morning, but when I came home that evening, they were gone. I assumed the garbage company accidentally took them or something. I called and they said, nope, they don't take the cans, just empty them. Weird. I had to buy new cans. Minor inconvenience, sure, but now, in hindsight, I suspect it was related. At the time, I still wasn't connecting the dots. Then, more unnerving things. One morning, I found broken glass on our driveway, like a beer bottle had been smashed there in the night. Not an accident near the road, right in front of our garage. A week later, someone spray-painted the word snitch on the sidewalk in front of my house. It was small and cleaned off easily, but it definitely felt targeted. By this point, Emily was convinced that Rick, or someone loyal to him, was messing with us. I was stubborn. I didn't want to believe we still had to worry about that jerk. He was gone. Probably in another state by now. Rumor was he moved in with his daughter across the city, but who knows. But eventually I had to admit the likelihood that this was deliberate harassment, likely from Rick or an associate. Maybe he didn't move far and was still stewing. Or maybe one of his close buddies, though he didn't have many left, blamed me for the whole debacle. The watch your back note really seemed like his style cowardly and bitter. Emily urged me to install some security cameras, at least a doorbell cam. I agreed, feeling guilty that I'd brushed off her concerns for weeks. I set up a couple of outdoor cameras, one facing the driveway and one by the front door, just to catch anyone who might be creeping around. For a while, things were quiet. I thought maybe whoever it was noticed the cameras, or got bored. Life started to feel normal. Too normal, maybe, because that's when the next bomb dropped a lawsuit. Yep, Rick. I had no doubt it was him once I saw the details. Decided to sue me and the HOA for defamation, harassment, and wrongful eviction. When I was served the papers, I practically burst out laughing at the audacity. He was claiming that I conspired to smear his reputation with false accusations. We had proof of his misdeeds, and that I abused my position to force him out of his home through harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was so absurd it almost read like a parody. But it was real, and it was terrifying in its own way, because even baseless lawsuits require time, money, and energy to handle. And that was presumably his goal, to bleed us, or me, dry out of spite, since he couldn't win fairly. The HOA's lawyer assured us the case was nonsense, and we had all the documentation to back up our actions. But legal processes are slow. We had to respond, file motions, etc. As HOA president, I was named in the suit personally as well. I won't drag you through legal minutia, but essentially this meant months of headache. And guess what? The neighborhood grapevine says Rick got a new lawyer, one very familiar name. That mystery law firm the HOA had been paying under Rick's watch, it belonged to an old college buddy of Rick's. So he basically used HOA funds to retain his buddy's legal services before, and now that same buddy was representing him in this revenge lawsuit. The irony is painful. This started to wear on me. I was doing the right thing, yet I felt punished. My work began to suffer because I was constantly organizing documents for the lawyer or worrying about what else Rick might pull. Emily was supportive, but I could tell the stress was affecting her too. I'd catch her looking out the window anxiously at night, and she had trouble sleeping. Our son, now a toddler, picked up on the tension. He'd wake up more at night or get fussy when we were on edge. I began to question if this war was worth it. I mean, yes, we got rid of the tyrant, but at what cost to my family's peace? The camera by the driveway finally paid off one night. Around 2 a.m. on a Saturday, I woke to a motion alert on my phone. Half asleep, I looked and saw a figure on the camera feed near my garage. I jumped out of bed, adrenaline surging, and whispered to Emily to call the police. I grabbed a baseball bat, the only weapon I had, not that I really thought I'd need to use it, and carefully opened the front door, heart pounding. The figure was still there, near my car now. It was a man, medium build, wearing a dark hoodie. He hadn't seen me. I stepped onto the porch and in my steadiest voice yelled, "Hey! Who's there? I'm calling the police!" The guy startled and bolted so fast I couldn't even get a look at his face. He ran down the street and disappeared between houses. I was shaking like a leaf, but also angry. I checked the area where he'd been and found something that made my blood run cold. He had poured some kind of liquid on the ground by my garage, smelled like gasoline, and a discarded box of matches lay nearby. He was trying to set my house on fire. I cannot describe the mix of rage and fear I felt. If I hadn't gotten that motion alert when I did, I don't even want to think about it. The police arrived within minutes. Our town is small and quiet, and an attempted arson definitely got their attention. We made a report, handed over the video footage. It was grainy, and the guy's face was covered, but the police said they'd investigate. I had a sinking feeling who was behind it, if not in person, then in spirit. Rick. This was way beyond a few pranks. This was criminal. Whether it was Rick himself or someone he put up to it, they intended real harm. After that night, Emily insisted we go stay at her parents' place across town for a while. I agreed readily. Our home didn't feel safe, and I wasn't going to risk my family. We informed the board and neighbors about what happened, which caused an uproar. People were shocked that it had gone this far. A couple of neighbors volunteered to watch our place, and one guy even said he'd park his car in our driveway sometimes to make it look occupied. In the midst of all this, the lawsuit nonsense was still looming, but honestly, the attempted arson overtook every other concern. The police's investigation actually progressed faster than the civil case. About 2 weeks after the incident, a detective informed me they might have a lead. Apparently, there were some fingerprints on the matchbox, and they got a hit. The matches had been handled by none other than Glenn. Yes, that Glenn, Rick's old board lackey who had apologized to me. When I heard that, I felt both sick and strangely unsurprised. Glenn had been one of the few who remained close to Rick. Why he'd do something so extreme, I couldn't fathom. Was he that loyal, or did Rick manipulate him? They brought Glenn in for questioning. He denied trying to burn my house, of course, but admitted he had been hanging around my property that night just to talk. Total BS. Faced with the fingerprint evidence and video, he eventually cracked. He confessed that Rick had contacted him a few weeks after moving, bitter and vengeful, and fed him some story that I was a horrible person who ruined his life with lies. Rick apparently paid Glenn to scare us into dropping our campaign against him, the lawsuit, the charges, etc. I don't know what amount or what exactly Rick asked him to do, but it clearly went very, very wrong. Glenn insisted he never meant to actually hurt anyone, just send a message. A freaking gasoline message? The police charged Glenn with attempted arson and some other related offenses. As for Rick, this was now a criminal conspiracy issue. The police turned their findings over to the DA to see about charging Rick for instigating it. To say I was livid would be an understatement. We trusted Glenn, we forgave him, and he literally came back to try and burn us? And Rick, this psychopath, wouldn't stop until someone got seriously hurt. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that justice was swift. Glenn's arrest did effectively stop the harassment. No more notes or vandalism after that. We cautiously moved back home, though I was hyper-vigilant about security. The neighborhood was shaken up. Many couldn't believe Rick would go that far, but the proof was there. Some actually tried to defend him, saying maybe Glenn acted alone. I had no doubt Rick was behind it, but I understand it was just so extreme that people didn't want to think a former neighbor they chatted with could be capable of that. Emily was having a hard time. She put on a brave face, but I knew the stress and fear had gotten to her. One night after we moved back, I found her quietly crying in the kitchen. She confessed she felt guilty, like she had pushed me into fighting Rick initially, and now our family was in danger. I held her and told her none of this was her fault, that Rick was the one responsible, not us for standing up to him. But I also quietly wondered, for the first time, if maybe moving away, like she first suggested, would have been the safer path. It's a horrible, defeated feeling to question doing the right thing. Anyway, legally, Rick's frivolous lawsuit was thrown out by a judge pretty quickly once our lawyer presented the evidence of his wrongdoing and even the criminal investigation info. So at least I didn't have that hanging anymore. Small win. The HOA did pursue charges for the financial stuff, and we were gearing up for a civil suit to get our money back. But those proceedings were paused given the criminal crap that took precedence. As of this update, Glenn is facing trial. I might have to testify on, and the DA has filed charges against Rick for solicitation of arson and some other related charges. There's a warrant out for his arrest. Surprise, surprise. Rick is nowhere to be found now. Word is he skipped town when he heard Glenn was arrested. I'm not sure where he could run. He's not exactly a criminal mastermind able to hide forever. Part of me fears him coming back, but realistically, he's probably more scared of prison than he is hell-bent on revenge at this point. The neighborhood remains supportive. A bunch of folks even pooled money to get us a top-notch security system and motion lights everywhere as a thank you for what we went through. I'm incredibly grateful for that. It's heartwarming and keeps us feeling somewhat safer. Emotionally, though, I'm pretty wrecked. I put on a strong front for the community and for my family, but in private I've been having nightmares about fire and break-ins. I flinch at loud noises. My therapist, oh yeah, I started seeing one, finally, says it's a form of PTSD from the trauma and prolonged stress. Never imagined a damn HOA feud would lead to this. Emily and I are also working through some strain. She's been urging me to consider stepping down as HOA president after all this, and I'm honestly inclined to agree. We achieved what we wanted. Rick is gone. I don't have the energy or desire to hold on to this role if it means painting a target on my back forever. At the next annual meeting, I might announce that I won't seek another term and let someone else take the lead. Hopefully someone fair-minded we can trust. Some might see that as letting Rick win, but I see it as taking my life back. I wish I had a more positive, tied with the bow update. I truly thought removing Rick would be the end, and we'd all go on our merry way. Instead, it got dark and downright dangerous. We're surviving, and I think we'll be okay. But the scars, literal and figurative, will take time to heal. I have one more update to share, and it's the last one, because frankly, I need to close this chapter for good. Update 2. This will likely be my final update on the HOA saga, and it's a tough one to write. A lot has happened in the 6 or so months since my last update, and while some of it brings a bit of closure, not all of it is the kind of closure one hopes for. I'll get straight to the biggest development. Rick was caught, and the situation took an unexpected turn that left me with very mixed feelings. A couple months after the attempted arson incident and legal chaos, the police finally tracked Rick down. He had fled to a relative's house in another state, but was picked up after a traffic stop revealed the warrant on record. He was extradited back to face charges. When I got the call from the DA's office that they have him in custody, I felt a flood of relief and anger. All the fear we'd lived in, all the stress it had a face and a name, and it was Rick. Part of me fantasized about confronting him in court, about him finally facing justice in a very public way. Well, the confrontation happened, but not how I envisioned. As the case against Rick proceeded, his attorney reached out to the DA about a plea deal. I won't lie, I was a bit disappointed. I wanted him to be fully exposed at trial, but they had a solid case, and I understand avoiding a trial can be better for everyone, including us, so we wouldn't have to relive it on the stand more than necessary. The deal was that Rick would plead guilty to several charges, including solicitation to commit arson and felony vandalism, in exchange for a reduced sentence. He'd still likely serve jail time, though, and importantly, he'd have to pay restitution to the HOA for the stolen funds, and to us for the damages and trauma, presumably. Here's where it took a turn I didn't see coming. The day of the plea hearing, I chose to attend. I wanted to see him plead guilty with my own eyes. Emily decided to stay home. She didn't want to see him again, which I respected. In the courtroom, Rick looked awful. He'd lost weight, hair disheveled, the once arrogant posture now stooped. It was strange, but I didn't feel the triumph I expected. He just looked like a bitter, defeated old man. When the judge asked him to confirm his plea, Rick's voice cracked. And then he did something that truly caught me off guard. He turned toward me. I was sitting behind with some other HOA board members, and he spoke. He said, "I'm sorry. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I lost my way." The judge quickly admonished him to address the court, not individuals, but the moment hung in the air. I just stared back, not even knowing how to respond. Was that genuine remorse? An act for leniency? I honestly don't know. I might never know. I didn't say anything to him. What could I say? Too little, too late. The plea was entered, and just like that, he was led away in handcuffs, likely off to serve a couple of years in state prison. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but instead I felt this hollow sadness. This whole saga, it destroyed Rick's life, nearly destroyed mine, and scared and scarred many in our community. Over what? Petty power games, ego, pride. It all felt so senseless. I had won, yet it didn't feel like much of a victory in that moment. Glenn, for his part, also took a plea deal for a lesser charge, accessory to attempted arson or something along those lines, and got some probation and community service. He actually wrote a letter to me and the neighborhood apologizing profusely, saying he was manipulated by Rick and made the worst choice of his life, etc. I have a hard time forgiving him, but I also recognize he was a weak person under Rick's sway. Not inherently evil on his own. I've mostly just put him out of my mind. With the legal matters largely settled, I turned to rebuilding normalcy. True to my thoughts in the last update, I announced at the HOA annual meeting, which I managed to get through with trembling hands, that I would be stepping down as president and not seeking re-election. I delivered a short speech thanking everyone for their support and urging them to keep the community spirit alive. I admitted that the past year had taken a toll on me and my family, and that I needed to focus on them and my own well-being. People looked sad but understanding. We held a new election, and a neighbor I trust, Maria, who had been a vocal supporter of change and fairness, was elected the new president. I happily turned over the HOA files to her. She's already doing a great job from what I hear, and she still comes to me for advice occasionally, which I don't mind. It's like being an emeritus advisor rather than the frontline soldier, much healthier for me. As for my personal life, Emily and I have been working on healing. I'll be honest, the stress uncovered some cracks in our relationship that we're addressing. We ended up going to couples therapy for a bit. A lot of feelings came out. Her guilt for suggesting I fight back, then feeling responsible. My guilt for putting the crusade ahead of family safety at times. Her lingering fear and my lingering anger. It wasn't easy to unpack, but we're doing it. The therapist helped us communicate better, and we're in a much better place now than a few months ago. We even managed to take a short vacation with our son, the first time we truly relaxed in a long time. Sitting on a quiet beach, watching our little boy play in the sand, it really hit me how precious peace is. We nearly sold our home at one point during the worst of it, but we decided to stay. This is our home, damn it, and we won't be driven out. But I made a promise to Emily and myself that I won't let any neighborhood drama consume me like that again. If something isn't right, we'll handle it together or with proper help, but I'm done being a lone vigilante. The neighborhood has slowly returned to normal. Actually better than normal. Without Rick's oppressive presence, people have become closer.